Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some pro-revenge stories. And our first story of the day is by Theliterside. Mock my mother's death? I bankrupt you. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house as a whole was a renovated townhouse split between two sides with two apartments on the bottom and two apartments upstairs, with addresses, ending in 126 to 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment as it was a much older building than I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us that he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day that we moved in there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling in wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now, Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 p.m., she explained what happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now this is where I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and to call him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he began trying to talk to me as a bro and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, and so, as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished. And I then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, then the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved. Meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor Phil was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked with Jay on speakerphone if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it leads to 2 conclusions. 1, if you're going to lie, then there has to be a consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. 2, this is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later, Jay stopped coming to the house and his mom began doing the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off and we were working with Social Security for food, health, and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we would not get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave a summons saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer and, going before the judge, here's the summation, or rather a non-verbatim account of how the case went. The judge said, "Does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment?" We say, "Yes, Your Honor." Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge says, "I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here?" Jay says, "Well, Your Honor, they have been bullying." Judge says, "I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed." Suffice it to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and to please just respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Oh, my mommy just died, woe is me." She probably had it coming. "I don't care if your entire family is dead, I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud with what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so freaked up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by to not open the door. I waited until August since that was the month before the lease was going to run out and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now, it's important to know several things. 1. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah on the other side of the downstairs floor had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose on the upper right apartment. 2. I had gotten permission and her spare key so I could let the inspector in Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right to let him in on Tom's now vacant apartment. And 3. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and myself. The inspector came and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house, first noting that the wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and as I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994. 18 years. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items along with gasoline and a pack of matches sitting right beside it. 2 things that I did not know was: 1. The fire door that separated the 2 sides did not close all of the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. 2. On the right, 128 portion, basement side, there was a toilet. A toilet that had blown up. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20 to 30 grand from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines and no one new could not move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. Because 3 out of the 4 were vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records and she was fined for each time she had broken that rule, $750 per. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No. Screw that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property, and asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartments in very poor to intolerable levels, and that the mom was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone turned to litigations. She was threatened that they would summon the inspector, or more often than not, the people would move out. She'd refuse their deposit and sink those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were of upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done with at least one tenant, if not more, would be waiting the inspector when they came. Turns out that she faced pretty much the same infractions on every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over were given a mysterious heads up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35 to 40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but also saw that his mother was also trying desperately to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she too had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment 2 days in October of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me and or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the 2nd floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most: their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just freaking fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. So let me know, considering that this operation was basically ran for 35 to 40 years for almost 4 decades at least, do you think that they got their just desserts, or do you think that them having to file for bankruptcy and lose those properties is just a slap on the wrist compared to what they really deserve? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Pork and Beans 19. Revenge on the neighbor's kids, intrusion on our property. So our neighbor's kids do not know boundaries and like to play in front of our house and sometimes in our driveway. We do not mind doing that, but we find it disrespectful when they leave their toys behind our cars at the end of the day. Countless times we have had to move their stuff out of the way to get our cars out, and there have been a few times that we run over their stuff and had some close calls with bigger items like strollers and bikes. As my significant other was heading out to put the trash out for pickup this morning, he found one of their bikes right where we are supposed to put our barrel. Guess what ended up being mistaken for trash today? His thought process was, they should be more careful where they put their stuff on trash day. He chose not to move it for all the times we had to do it for them. Whoops. As a former dumb kid that was never able to clean up after themselves properly or put things where they were supposed to, I actually kind of feel bad for the kids because they did lose out on whatever they did leave there, and they're just kids, but it will be a really valuable learning experience for the kids and hopefully their parents to really reinforce them to put stuff back properly. And at the end of the day, it's not their kids, it was never your problem to begin with. And our final story of the day is by Shiplet RPHT. Everyone's got selective hearing in pharmacy. I work at the market version of the big box store with the Spark in the pharmacy. Literally just had this conversation with a patient who was now called twice within 10 to 15 minutes. First call, the patient is asking about if we have filled his oxycodone. It's not filled as it's out of stock and we don't receive C2 orders except 2 days of the week. Days. His script came over the weekend. I inform him we won't have it until tomorrow. He then gets upset and starts asking when the order will be in time specific, when the doc sent it, and that tomorrow probably won't work for him. Told him if he wants to call his doctor and they can send it to another pharmacy and cancel it with us. Tells me he'll think about it and may call back. Now the second call. Hi, I called about 10 minutes ago about my oxycodone not being filled and I would like to have it transferred to another pharmacy. Okay, so you would have to call your doctor and have them electronically send it to another pharmacy. They already have sent it electronically, you're holding it for me. Yes, but this type of medication cannot be transferred by federal law. That's not what you told me 10 minutes ago. You said that it was no problem and it could be transferred. No, I did not. I told you that you would have to have the doctor call it in to another pharmacy. You said it could be transferred. Me, silent since I'm done arguing. Well, you'll need to call your doctor to send it in. No one even called me to let me know that it was on back order. It's not on back order, it will just be in tomorrow. Patient, silence, click. Decide to look on our resolution queue at his script. Big smile across my face as I click the send out of stock text message to him. So the patient couldn't wrap his head around needing to call the doctor to find a pharmacy themselves that can fill it that day. Otherwise, the pharmacy cannot transfer it themselves. It's not really a hard thing to grasp, but this patient can't put two and two together. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So, which of these stories was your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and turn notifications on if you haven't so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Any little thing that you do helps the channel grow so much more. Whether it's commenting, subscribing, or just watching the video, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time, right here.